If all's gone according to plan, you guys have just finished an amazing trip through Chicago, and you're headed on to the next place Jason's got you going. I'm sure that will be awesome as well. When Jason asked us to do this, I said, well, who are we doing it? Who are we speaking to? And he said, well, high school seniors. You know, Alyssa Paul and stuff. And I said, whoa, time out. Alyssa Paul's not a senior in high school. She can't be. She's like this big. But no, it's time, and I'm old. But I am so excited to see where God takes you next. Every one of you on that bus, I'm excited to see where God takes you next. When he asked us to pick topics, he gave us all, I'm sure, a menu of which one of these kind of jumps out at you. And the topic that I've chosen today jumps out at me more than anything else on that list, and that's the topic of perspective. I consider it to be one of the greatest gifts God has given me. God's perspective changed the way I look at the world. Before I had it, before I knew of God, and I knew of His Spirit, and I knew what He wanted me to see and how He wanted me to see things, I was lost. I was often worrying about how I was going to pay for things I wanted to pay for. I was worried about where life was going to take me next. I was worried about change. Anytime change happened, I was like, oh no, don't be messing with my world. And I admittedly spent a lot of time worrying about, was this life it? Was this broken world where things are messed up, all of it? Was there nothing else? But God's perspective helps me see it differently. When I was younger, I was always kind of enamored with Native American cultures, in particular, the idea of a spirit guide. And I convinced myself that this spirit guide, this animal whose spirit was tied to mine, who was there to help guide me and show me things and help me see the world, I was convinced it was a red-tailed hawk. And I believe it's because the hawk always intrigued me. How could this animal be, half a mile in the air, soaring way up over the clouds, and seeing things in a way that I could never see them? To be able at one moment to see miles and miles away, and at the very next to see a tiny little mouse in a field amongst the corn, or a fish in a lake, and know exactly how to dive, where to dive, and hit the mark. How could such a perspective exist? I think sometimes we forget that God promises perspective. He says in Isaiah 40, verse 31, he says, "Those who love me will soar on wings like eagles." They will fly above the difficulty of this life. They will see beyond what's right in front of them. And they will see things with a perspective that the rest of the world can't. It goes on further to say that they will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not grow faint. They will be able to handle what life dishes out. That is God's perspective. As you guys go into college in the next few months or next year, you're going to see people with lots of different perspectives on life. And on one hand, I would encourage you to say, okay, let's see what they think and why. Because this is a time in your life where your eyes are going to be opened in ways that you're like, I did not even know that existed in this world. I did not know that people thought that way, felt that way, acted that way, or believed that way. But you need to be careful that those perspectives don't take you away from God's perspective. See, God tells us really clearly in 1 Corinthians that His perspective is far above anybody else's. In fact, He says that exactly in 1 Corinthians 2. He says, what no man has seen and no man has heard and no man can even imagine in his heart, God reveals to His people through His Spirit. God's perspective is beyond the rest of the world. One of the greatest things that, as I said, God has provided me is that perspective. And the reason is that I don't fear anymore. I don't worry anymore. I don't worry about whether or not God is going to provide. I don't worry about what the next thing's going to be. I don't worry about if I'm going to like it or I'm not. Because I know that if it comes from God, it's all good. It's a perspective that I wish the rest of the world had. If the world could see things the way God sees them, if we could see the big picture, if we could soar above the challenges and the difficulties and the fray and see this is the big picture and this is where God has us going, I can't help but think the world would be a better place. And the world needs that perspective, and it needs that perspective from you. The world needs to hear from God, and it will hear through you. Christ promises in John chapter 14 that He will provide us with a peace. As His disciples as He's leaving to ascend to the heavens, and His disciples are saying, What do you mean you're going to leave? And He's like, look, when I leave, I'm going to leave you with something better. I'm going to leave you with peace. I'm going to leave you with a peace that no man can possibly achieve on his own. I'm going to leave you with the peace of my Spirit. I'm going to leave you with my perspective of life. Interesting thing about that perspective, though, that perspective requires that we stay close to its source. The further away you get from the source of something, the source of light, or the source of this perspective in your world, the harder it is to see in the darkness that is the world around us. As I said before, you're going to be bombarded with things over the next several years of your life, with all kinds of different perspectives and viewpoints and attitudes and beliefs and feelings, and don't lose sight of the perspective that matters. Don't lose sight of God's perspective. It's God's perspective that provides peace. It's God's perspective that allows us to soar above all the challenges that life gives. And it's God's perspective that you need to bring to the world. Because that's what He has you here for. Is to show the world who our God is. And how He sees with a perspective that no one else can. I thank you for a few minutes of your time, for the chance to speak. God bless you on your journey. Stay in touch, and I am so excited to see where you head next.
I have a friend whose daughter started doing drugs. She's 13, 14 years old. gothic gal. And we were getting together, and he was telling me, she's dating this guy that I don't approve of, and I try to drag her to church and these kinds of things. And I'm listening to this, and it just sounds like a bitter dad, And I say to him, he says, what should I do? And I said, I think what she's choosing is to be wanted and needed. She gets to play something like a princess. She knows she's designed for this role, right? And with this guy, even though he's a loser, she gets to play this role in this story because you've provided a story that's just not as good. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no, everybody provides a story. As a pastor, you provide a story. As a dad, you provide a story. As a mom, you provide a story. As a teacher, you provide a story. And all she's doing is choosing a story that she likes better than your story. So he thinks about it, and he's like, well, how do I do that? And I tell him, and he goes back, and he goes nuts. He goes home, and he says to his family, he gets them all together. He and his wife about to get a divorce. In her story, she thinks she's causing the divorce, right? So he gets them together. He says, after about 3 weeks worth of research, he says, I found a village in Mexico that needs an orphanage. Here's what's going to happen to these kids in this community if they don't get an orphanage. It's going to cost $25,000. We're in debt up to our heels. We don't have the money. And they're all looking at him like, so? He says, we need to build it. We need to build it within 2 years. And if we don't build it, some kids are probably not going to make it. And the family's just looking at him like, you're nuts. And after about a week, the daughter comes to him and says, I have this MySpace page. Maybe I could, tell my friends about it and we could get some support. And then he had a son, he said, we're going to need passports if we're going to go to Mexico. And, you want to visit this? Yeah, we need to visit it. All of a sudden, his whole family is wrapped up. She ends up breaking up, the little girl ends up breaking up with the guy. You know why she broke up with the guy? Because she's found a better story. And now she's telling the dude, she's like, you don't understand. I'm a hero, in a sense. She doesn't have words. I'm a hero in this story. And you're a loser. So I'm done with you, right? As Christians, we've been hijacked by a different story, and we're supporting a story that isn't as good as the story that God has provided for us. And as Christian leaders, we provide a great story for people to get wrapped up in. All right, thanks.
Awesome.